Welcome to In Focus. I'm your host, Adil Sabir, joining you from Pakistan's federal capital, Islamabad. On July the 15th, the foreign ministers of India and Pakistan met here in Islamabad to resume the peace process and to help to attempt to bridge the trust deficit between both the neighbours following the 2008 Mumbai terrorist attacks, which were allegedly carried out by Pakistani nationals. Now, the talks come at a particular time when both India and Pakistan are jockeying for position ahead of the US troop withdrawal from Afghanistan to begin in July next year. India and Pakistan have fought 3 wars. Today we will discuss whether or not these two nuclear arch rivals can ever bury the hatchet for the sake of regional peace and stability. To help me discuss these matters, I have Mr. Zahid Hamid, who is a security consultant as well as a political commentator, and Mr. General Retired Hamid Gul, who is the former chief of Pakistan's premier spy agency, the ISI. Gentlemen, welcome to In Focus. Now, the talks were quite substantive, but there was no real breakthrough. We went out and spoke to 2 senior Pakistani journalists and an Indian journalist regarding their thoughts on the talks. Let's take a look.
I think it was more like a dialogue of the deaf. What the Indians were saying was in monotone, just one refrain that it has to be counter-terrorism efforts, that Pakistan has to do more, a bit like the Americans. And what the Pakistanis were saying was falling on deaf ears. So the two could not really speak the language that both could understand. I think it was a bit of a diplomatic disaster, if you ask me.
I think Foreign Minister Krishna, has been equally forthright in, what the Indian viewpoint was. I think he's very, very clearly stated that, India wanted more action on terrorism-related concerns, especially concerns about terrorism directed against India. So I guess that's the area where, the two sides weren't able to find any common ground, and that's where things went wrong in the talks.
Pakistani Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi tried his level best to convince the Indian Foreign Minister, Mr. Krishna, to have a dialogue on Kashmir and water, but Mr. Krishna was not ready to speak on water and Kashmir. He was more interested in talking on terrorism. So no doubt terrorism is also a very important issue, but Kashmir is the core issue of Pakistan.
Some thoughts there of 2 senior Pakistani journalists and an Indian journalist. First, coming to you, Mr. Hamid. A lot of talking, no substantive roadmap. We saw no issues like Kashmir being talked about, the water issue, Sir Creek, no joint statement as such, a media fallout, in fact, on both sides. So do you believe, as many say, that this was just an exercise of like diplomatic shadowboxing by India, if you may, particularly just to maybe appease those on the other side of the Atlantic?
You see, the hostility between Pakistan and India has been rising in the last many months. And as far as the diplomatic peace talks are concerned, these could be the worst possible timings for them. Because Pakistan and India are now fighting a proxy war in Afghanistan. And Pakistan has practically dislodged India now. As the NATO comes under pressure, the Americans are talking of an exit strategy, and Indians are panicking. So for Indians to, at this stage, come for talks with Pakistan in an environment when tempers in Pakistan are rising over the Indian blockade of Pakistani rivers, when Kashmir insurgency is already flaming up, almost out of control, and the Maoist insurgency in India is also raging now, that Indian army has been forced to tell their government that Kashmir militancy cannot be controlled by military force, but a political discourse or dialogue has to be initiated, because Indian army is now being asked to control the Maoist insurgency. So, from these perspectives, both these countries to come together for some kind of dialogue or peace process was a facade in any case. We knew that beforehand. Nothing is going to come out. It's only going to be a photo op exercise. And in reality, the friction between the two countries have increased in the last many months, and it's in fact boiling over now.
Quickly, Mr. Gul, a very bizarre statement made by the Indian side, particularly the Indian Home Secretary on the eve of the talks, where he lashes out at the ISI, saying that under interrogation of Mr. Headley had said that Pakistan's ISI had executed and planned the Mumbai attacks. He could have made this statement earlier, of course, but some would say that there can't be smoke without fire.
No, this is nonsense. Individual Pakistanis may have been involved in it, but there is no evidence. Evidence is the one which is sustainable in a court of law, which can stand the scrutiny on the floor of the court. And they haven't come up with anything. They've been talking in the language of Tony Blair. A dossier has been sent to Pakistan, another dossier had been sent. But where is the dossier? I mean, it has to go to the court. When it went to the court just threw it out of the window. And they said there is no evidence that we can incarcerate these innocent people. You see, the Indian and Pakistani courts run on the basis of Anglo-Saxon law. The law of evidence is the same in Pakistan as it is in India. So I don't know what they are making so much fuss about.
Now, the composite dialogue process between India and Pakistan, just going back to the two countries themselves, was initiated back in 1997, I believe, where there was an 8-point agenda which both countries were meant to follow. It seems that in this particular phase of relationships that we see between Pakistan and India, that the original talk was of composite dialogue. And now we see that there's a bit of a shift on the part of India, where they're now talking of sustained dialogue. And some would say that phraseology has actually ruined these talks. Would you agree?
You see, Indians would never come to any talks, whether it is composite dialogue or any other kind of talk. They have only come here under the duress of the Americans. Let us make it very clear. It was the American initial agenda, under the FPAC doctrine, under the dossier of the Holbrooke, that Indians would be brought to talks with Pakistan so that they can resolve the Kashmir dispute, so that Pakistan army can focus on the Western theatre. Indians objected very seriously to that. And ever since that time, Indians have been refusing the American pressure also. While Pakistan, as Pakistan continue to exert themselves against the Americans in Afghanistan, Pakistan has been forcing the Americans to contain the Indians in Afghanistan, as well as force Indians to come on for some kind of talks. Now, that is the reason, that was the only reason why Indians came. Otherwise, there is absolutely no pressure on India. As General Sahib said, they did not come with an open mind, with an open heart. In fact, they came with malafide in their intent. They came only for the photo op, to break the dialogue even before it starts. And that's exactly what happened, because the animosity, the hatred between the countries have been rising in the last 6 months. And for the foreign ministers to come to talk at this particular moment was actually surprising or amusing, if I would say, because we knew even before they started, they're going to break down even before anything starts. So that's exactly what happened.
Coming to you, Mr. Gul, finally for this part of the section of the programme, there are some analysts who say that, okay, there are 7 people who are being currently tried in anti-terrorism courts here related to the Mumbai attacks here in Pakistan, but the Pakistan has like almost failed to close these cases, which perhaps may be an indication that the establishment is not willing to really engage India, which is still, it deems to be enemy number 1.
No, it is enemy number 1, undoubtedly. There is no two opinions about it in Pakistan. So it is an enemy until the issue of Kashmir is settled, and it is settled on just and equitable basis.
No, meaning to say that the fact that the courts or the judicial process hasn't managed to close the cases on these 7 suspects who are currently being tried, would that suggest or hint that perhaps the establishment itself is not willing to engage with India?
I don't know. I think the government has, in Pakistan, even during Pervez Musharraf's time, it has been severally talking to India, please come and talk to us, but it was within the framework of the composite dialogue. After the Bombay attack, the Indians changed their line altogether, and they started talking about terrorism only, 1-point agenda for India. Now it is not getting anywhere. And the Americans are in a hurry because they have to pull out of Afghanistan.
We will discuss standing issues facing India and Pakistan. All of that coming up after this break. Do stay tuned to In Focus. Welcome back to In Focus. We're discussing Pakistan-India relations and how the recent talks will affect what may or may not happen in the coming months. Mr. Ahmed, once again, I want to come back. We will discuss standing issues facing India and Pakistan. All of that coming up after this break. Do stay tuned to In Focus. Welcome back to In Focus. We're discussing Pakistan-India relations and how the recent talks will affect what may or may not happen in the coming months. Mr. Ahmed, once again, I want to come back to the burning issue of Kashmir. Core to Pakistan, body swerved by India in many ways. The External Affairs Minister Krishna said that there are still infiltrations taking place by rogue elements coming in from Pakistan, whereas Mr. Qureshi said that there's no state or intelligence involvement in Indian-held Kashmir. Did Mr. Qureshi, in your opinion, and Pakistan roll over too easily over Kashmir?
See, he has been rolling over too easily. Previously also, even when the Indian aircraft came after the Mumbai attack into Pakistan, they penetrated Pakistan at two places with the intention to bomb Pakistan. The first statement came from the Pakistani Foreign Ministry saying they came by mistake. If you just consider the border, line of control between Pakistan and India now, it is multi-layered fencing, minefields, radars, surveillance, drones. If still penetration is going on across the line of control, it only means the Indian army is a bunch of schoolboys. Whatever is happening in Kashmir right now is totally indigenous, because the militancy level has reduced, but the civilian uprising has increased.
Yeah.
And basically now, the uprising, it's civilian intifada, with literally children with stones and sticks fighting the 500,000 Indian troops there. So when the militancy level has gone down and the civilian population has gone up in an uprising, it's a clear indication that it's an indigenous struggle.
Mr. Gul, putting it more in a politically correct way, some people are even referring to Kashmir as increasingly looking like the Gaza Strip. We see an uprising, as Mr. Hamid has mentioned, which is boiling over. Why, if you could explain to the international audience, why is Kashmir the linchpin between the dialogue between India and Pakistan? For the international audience, if you could help to explain that.
Well, it is the part of the unfinished agenda of the partition of the subcontinent in 1947. And the other side of it is that the Indians went too, because the Kashmiris started moving into, along with the tribal people of Pakistan, into Kashmir, and they almost closed up on Srinagar. They captured Srinagar airfield at one time. So at that time, Nehru ran to the United Nations, and he sued for peace. And he said that we will give to the people of Kashmir the right of self-determination to choose between India or Pakistan. And there are those resolutions of 1949, not one, but two of them. On that, Indian leadership agreed, Pakistani leadership agreed, and the Kashmiri leadership of that time agreed. So there is a consensus. The world community agreed. This is the only consensus resolution of the United Nations. There is a consensus between the contending parties that we will give to the people the right of self-determination. Now, India is a democracy, and if they are denying to the people of Kashmir the right of self-determination, what kind of a democracy is it?
I think Kashmir is one issue which is so contentious in many ways for both countries that it's probably going to be the last thing which will be resolved. And there are other issues which were sidestepped in these talks.
To add to what General Saab has said, if you kindly allow me, Quaid-e-Azam, the founding father of Pakistan, had called Kashmir the jugular of Pakistan. People at that time could not understand why a piece of territory could be the jugular. Maybe perhaps for emotions or ego or dignity. No. Now we understand it even more, that all 5 rivers, major rivers of Pakistan, flow into Pakistan from Kashmir. And India is blocking all these rivers, actually drying up Pakistan, destroying Pakistan's economy and agriculture. In the next 5 years, if the present rate of construction of dams and barrages continue in India, in Kashmir.
Is this in violation of the Indus Water Treaty?
This is totally in violation of Indus Water Treaty. Pakistan had sold 2 of its major rivers to India at that time. It was a lopsided treaty which favored India even in 1960, but it was done under the arm twisting of the World Bank. But still the 3 major rivers, including the Indus, including the major rivers which flow into Pakistan, come from Kashmir. And now Pakistan could afford to delay Kashmir dispute for 63 years. Pakistan cannot afford to delay water dispute even for next 5 years. And if there's not going to be war for land, I can guarantee you there'll be a war for water.
Mr. Gul, another issue. I mean, we're just going through the issues one by one, and this was quite prominent in the press conference briefing after the meeting of both foreign ministers. Mr. Krishna said that categorically, on record, that India has not been provided any evidence of involvement of RAW, particularly in destabilizing Balochistan. The prick and bleed methods which we've been seeing being deployed across Balochistan. Interestingly, Foreign Minister Qureshi remained silent on the matter. If there has been any evidence, which Pakistan so claims it has, then why the delay? Why not throw it on the table and say, there you go?
Well, the point is that the nation did not like the silence of Shah Mahmood Qureshi at that time. We have a big grouse against him. And the second point is that we don't want to show immaturity like India, coming up with evidence which will not, as I said, be sustainable in a court of law. So we know the evidence. The Americans have written about it. American representatives have come here in Afghanistan and in part of Zahedan, etc. And they have said that the Indians are playing game with Pakistan. There is no doubt about it. Before that, when Russians were in occupation of Afghanistan, the Indians were sitting in the lap of Soviet Union and they were trying to create problems for Pakistan. At that time too, the insurgency was going on in Balochistan, and that was inspired from outside. And as soon as the Russians went out, insurgency died out. And it has come up again because the Indians are now sitting on board the American ship in Afghanistan and they are trying to create problems. And we firmly believe that they are doing so not only to trouble Pakistan, but also to trouble Iran. Jandullah and other organizations are being created by the Americans. And the Indians are playing merry hell with Pakistani politics. And they are trying to create a lot of problems. But these are temporary, because as soon as Americans pull out of Afghanistan, all this will go away. The Indians are flowing against the current of history. The history is taking a turn very definitely, almost certainly, in a direction which is not going to be helpful to India unless they resolve their differences with Pakistan, while America is still in Afghanistan.
Final word from you, Mr. Hamid, in this section. Again, we see a rather big disconnect, as General Saab has said, that Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi remains silent on the issue regarding evidence of Indian involvement, not only in Balochistan but elsewhere across the country. The disconnect here is that the Pakistani army is on record saying that they have recovered weapons and other equipment, military hardware, belonging to India. So why is there such a disconnect between the political forces in Pakistan and the military forces in Pakistan?
See, this disconnect is very obvious. This government is perhaps the most incompetent and corrupt government that Pakistan has ever seen. And Americans always assumed that by betting on corrupt and incompetent horses, like they're betting in Kabul on Hamid Karzai and here in this People's Party government, they would get the job done from them. But it doesn't happen. Neither the Karzai able to deliver, neither this government. And military, for its own maturity this time, is not willing to interfere directly and openly into the Pakistani politics also. It is letting the Supreme Court commit the coup de grace. Now, but the point is that army cannot even sit and watch and wait and see the national security goes down the drain, collapsing entirely under the foreign ministers and policies of this government. So you see this, that while this government continue to compromise against the Pakistan's national interests, the military sits in the background, but at one certain moment they make a move. Like, for example, at the last session of the dialogue between Pakistan and India, the foreign minister was suddenly forced to change his tone to hawkish, and people were a bit surprised. But those who knew were not surprised, because they knew the key was given from somewhere else, and Mr. Qureshi had to behave. And this is how the army is doing it. They're keeping a watchful eye over this government, not interfering directly. But whenever the national security is compromised beyond certain limits, whenever the red line is crossed, military does step in.
It seems, gentlemen, that both India and Pakistan's foreign policies are driven by their military doctrines. Very briefly, if you could just summarize the paranoia of India and Pakistan regarding each other's presence in Afghanistan.
You see, Afghanistan has always been a proxy battlefield for each other. Indians always use Afghanistan to stab Pakistan in the back. In the 70s, they were supporting insurgencies in Balochistan and trying to carve out Pashtunistan, the frontier region. They were trying to carve out into a separate province with the help of the Soviets. And during the Taliban era, there was no Indian presence because Taliban were strongly anti-Indian. That's why you find Indian paranoia against Taliban as well. And now, with the American presence in Afghanistan, Indians have come back. That's why you find Indian paranoia against Taliban as well. And now, with the American presence in Afghanistan, Indians have come back, and insurgencies have come back into Pakistan. So this is very understandable that both these countries now, as the fourth generation warfare, as we say, which to avoid a nuclear showdown, the Yugoslavia doctrine, the option of supporting insurgencies and economic collapse and supporting the politically separatist groups, you bring about the collapse of a state. This is the doctrine that the Indians are deploying into Pakistan, and the base area, the staging post, is from Afghanistan. And understandably, Pakistan is very nervous. Pakistan was nervous. Now they are not nervous simply because now Pakistan has got an upper hand. It's the Americans who are nervous now because they want an exit strategy and depending on Pakistan. And Indians are now preparing for the end game. They have realized the Taliban are winning. They have realized that Americans are losing. They have realized that Indians will have no future in Afghanistan if Pakistan gains an upper hand. So Indians are desperately trying to hold some kind of ground through the help of the Americans and Iranians. And that is why you find Indians trying to be very pally, very friendly with the Iranians. But lately, it's the Iranians and Pakistanis who have come very close to each other, defying the Americans. The fact that Pakistan have assisted Iran to capture Jundullah chief and destroy that network of terrorism which was operating against Iranians, which was sponsored by the CIA, and the signing of the Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline. Both of these actions, which have brought Pakistan and Iran very close to the displeasure of the Americans, have also made Indians very nervous. Because if Pakistan and Iran can come together, there would not be any foreign occupation forces in Afghanistan, nor would Indians be able to yield any pressure or influence to affect or support insurgencies in Pakistan. As General Saab has very rightly said, if the Americans leave, Indians will have to leave too. And this is the battle right now that's going on. It's the battle for the control of the Asian heartland.
Well, this is a troika I want to just touch upon. I mean, if Iran, if Pakistan, Afghanistan all manage to get on the same page, and Turkey, they will provide a substantial Muslim bloc.
That will be a dream come true. I wrote a paper long time back, in 1988, on this, and there's a regional strategic consensus. If we have this consensus, I assure you, economically, militarily, strategically, socially, it is going to be an enormous gift of nature to us. And I think the situation is arriving.
I think, well, the Americans are quite aware of this growing nexus between Iran and Pakistan, but similarly, it seems in many ways as if the Americans want India and Pakistan to have some kind of like role in sharing in Afghanistan, so that they can actually fight a proxy perhaps against their larger enemies, or who they think perhaps are their
China.
Yeah, exactly.
China is, why don't you mention? No, they have right now, but they can't, because they are now Chinese are the bankers and the Americans are the borrowers. So in this kind of a relationship, I'm sure that Americans cannot take on China.
Mr. Ahmed, coming back to Iran again, India and Iran traditionally, when we look at Afghanistan, the tribes that they seem to have allied to in the past, the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, the Hazaras, they are pretty much, it's a well-known fact that both India and Iran have been supporting both these tribes. But Pakistan's strategy in the past has been just to support the Pakhtun Taliban, but now we see a slightly change in strategy. They now seem to be also willing to support Karzai, as well as the Taliban. Is this just to undermine the Indians entirely?
You see, Pakistan have always been influential in Afghanistan, even in Tajiks and Uzbeks and Hazaras also, during the Soviet war era. It's not that Pakistan never had an influence on them. We had great influence on those as well. But for the policies of the 90s, when the Americans had left and the confused governments in Islamabad completely lost the opportunity, that we lost our 6 parties which we had created, and lost the Tajiks, Uzbeks and Hazaras as well. But the opportunity came back to Pakistan in late 90s when the Taliban came back into power. But then the Taliban were at war with the Tajiks and the Persian speakings and the Uzbek speakings, and that's why the Irani factor came in. Those were the period when Pakistan and Iran were at worst relationship with each other because of Afghanistan. But the American presence in Afghanistan changed the dynamics once again, particularly now, when the Americans are hostile, very hostile towards Iranians, and Pakistanis have stretched a hand of friendship towards Iran at this stage, which is very welcoming for Iran. Iran have responded very positively. And both countries now realize that together they can create a new destiny in Afghanistan also. And in the coming days, I very strongly foresee that Pakistan and the ghost of the relationship of Pakistan and Iran will be buried, and a new chapter is going to unfold. Indians have been trying to lure Iran towards themselves against Pakistan, but it's not happening for them. Indians had built a road in Afghanistan so that the Iranian port of Chabahar could be used for the Afghan transit trade, and Afghanistan could become independent of Pakistan for the transit trade. But that's not happening also. Iran has not allowed the Afghan transit trade to go through Chabahar as yet. That means Afghanistan is still dependent upon Pakistan. And Pakistan has the leverage which the Indians wanted to bypass. It's not happening. So which is a very positive sign. In the coming days, Pakistan and Iran are going to actively cooperate together. The Lebanon type option, where the southern part could go to Hezbollah and the Beirut should be with some other government, these options are being floated by the American, Jewish, Indian, Zionist axis. But neither the Afghans, neither the Iranians, neither the Pakistanis would accept this. This would only remain a pipe dream for them. As far as Pakistan and Iran is concerned, a united, strong Afghanistan where all ethnic groups come together to form a national government suits us all. And this is going to be the future, inshallah.
Final word from you, Mr. Gul. You witnessed the withdrawal of the Soviets from Afghanistan and the way that they were defeated by the Afghan Mujahideen. We're seeing somewhat similar circumstances unraveling again, with the Americans finally realizing that they can't occupy this particular stretch of land which has seen off many conquerors. Finally, how do you see the India-Pakistan-Afghanistan relationship developing in the coming months?
I think India has no role so far, because they have, every time when they got the opportunity, they acted against the will of the Afghan nation, while Pakistan acted first time against, with the will of the nation and against the occupation forces. So Pakistan at least has a tremendous goodwill there, which India can never win. And India's only relationship, historically speaking, has been the Afghan invaders always going to Panipat and capturing Delhi. So India has absolutely no room there, save through Pakistan. So they've got to make amends with Pakistan if they really want to exploit the opportunities in the future. And as I said that, as very rightly, Iran is very important in this case, and Iran and Pakistan need to develop very close understanding on this whole issue. And inshallah, we have much to share, and we need not compete in Afghanistan. In fact, we must leave Afghanistan to its own tools, and I'm sure they have the ability, they have the sagacity and the capacity, and it has been proven historically that they can settle their matters internally.
Final two sentences from you, Mr. Hamid. Can India and Pakistan ever bury the hatchet?
I don't see it, not in the near future. In fact, as the situation is building up, it may sound harsh, but as India continue to drive Pakistan, make Pakistan a drought-ridden state, destroy our agriculture, block our waters, it's all heading for a big war.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me on In Focus. Of course, we all hope that India and Pakistan continue to talk, because no talks would mean that the Mumbai attackers had actually won and that the people of South Asia had lost. You can send your suggestions and comments through to our email address. That's infocus@presstv.com. That's infocus@presstv.com. I'm Adil Sabir. Till we meet again. Goodbye.